Hello and welcome to the Too Much Apparently podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast for the deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much apparently. And if you're back, thanks for choosing to sit with us again.
We're Alice and Carly, two therapists who are also just sensitive weirdos trying to make sense of life, healing, and our own brains. This isn't a professional advice podcast. It's more like the messy, honest conversations that happen when you finally feel safe enough to say what you're really thinking.
This space is for people like us, the ones who've been called too sensitive, too serious, too emotional, too intense, and have spent way too long believing that it's true.
Okay, on with the episode.
Today we're talking about being too sensitive to watch the news.
You know when the headlines alone make your stomach drop, and suddenly you're carrying the weight of the whole world before you've even had your coffee.
For some of us, the news doesn't just inform us, it gets under our skin. It can feel overwhelming, paralysing, even hopeless.
But then comes the guilt. If I switch off, am I just being privileged? Am I choosing comfort over caring?
We're going to explore why the news hits sensitive people so hard, how guilt and privilege show up here, and what it actually means to care without completely burning out.
I mean, we know sensitive people process more deeply, so it doesn't really come as any surprise to me that we will struggle with things like the news.
Right. And the news is so awful.
Well, there's that too. There's that too. But also, I mean, for some of the news, not that we have to get into the actual news itself necessarily, but that also depends on your frame of reference, doesn't it, in terms of some of the things in the news. I guess I'm talking a bit more there politically, where for some people it will be seen as awful, and for some, mind-bogglingly, it won't.
Yeah. I find that hard to even comprehend. Like, logically, I know that you're right.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because it has such a big impact on me, I just find it really hard to comprehend. Yeah, that other people wouldn't view it as awful.
I know, yeah. It is hard to comprehend. If we think about the news in general and the types of thing that gets reported on, whether that's the news as in on TV or whether it is reading news headlines and articles, or even just the social media that you now just see on your news feed, if you're going onto the socials that you then can't even have any control over whether or not you get to see it, it's just suddenly there in your face before you've even had chance to even know if you wanted to know about that or watch a video about that. So considering that the news is literally everywhere and more so now than it ever has been. Growing up, obviously, we wouldn't have had as much information at our fingertips like we do now. So I'm interested in if you have anything to say about how you would relate to the news or how you would view the news growing up versus maybe how you view it today.
It feels completely different, like just wildly different. So because when I was younger, we didn't have cable, so there wasn't that kind of rolling TV. There wasn't a news channel. You know, there was the news at lunchtime, like the morning, lunchtime, evening, and 10 o'clock. And as a kid, you'd have the CBBC news. And then I was thinking about newspapers being delivered, that you'd get yesterday's news that, you know, the following morning. And like, I'm even thinking about 9/11. So I think I was 15 when 9/11 happened, and I had no idea. So me and my friend had been in the library all day, and we came out probably 4-5 o'clock in the afternoon and completely oblivious. And I can't remember how we found out. Whereas now, obviously, you'd get an alert pop up on your phone, or if you were scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or whatever, you'd know straight away. And so, like, as you asked me the question, because I didn't even think about for this episode what my relation, you know, like historically, how it had been with the news. If you asked me the question, it was just like, oh my gosh, that was just a different world.
Even just thinking about the fact that the news that we got was yesterday's news.
Yeah.
So it's still quite fresh, but it's not fresh like the instantaneous way you get the news now.
Yeah.
That this is what happened yesterday.
Yeah. And you know, there will be exceptions to that, because obviously with the kind of the bulletins that you'd get at specific times of the day, like I can remember the morning that Princess Diana died.
Yeah, me too.
So obviously that was in the news quite quickly. But again, it's, you know, it's the news and then it's over. And I'm not sure. I think perhaps there might have been rolling programs on that day. But even if there was a rolling program on that day, because that was a major story, that wasn't the norm.
Yeah, it wasn't the norm. No.
Wasn't the norm at all. And I can't even think
That
when that changed.
I don't know, but that brings to mind when Princess Diana died, because that's one of my earliest memories of a big news story and me being aware of it. So I think I'd woken up. It must have been early because I used to watch Nickelodeon on cable, and I don't think it started till like 7 a.m. And if it was before then, you'd get the adverts and stuff. And I was expecting a program to be on, and it was just taken over by the news that Princess Diana had died. And so I was the one that I went upstairs to wake my mum up to tell her Princess Diana had died.
Yeah.
I remember that, but as you said, I remember being like, what? Why can't I watch my program? It was unusual to have a huge headline that then really dominated. So when it did, you knew about it, but
Yeah.
it also meant that it wasn't common.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Not common and not constant.
Mm.
Yeah. I wonder when it was that when that changed. I feel like for me, in terms of following things, I think it was around Brexit.
Oh,
I think I don't remember, like, because obviously we've had rolling news longer than, further back than 2016. But I think it was maybe even the shock of Brexit that kind of set something off in me around wanting to be prepared, which isn't just about Brexit for me. That goes kind of much further back into my history. But yeah, that it just felt so unexpected.
I think one of my earliest example of being really affected by the news is 9/11. So earlier than that, I was a typical child that found the news really boring, like your grandparents trying to tell you why the news is really important, and I'd just find it really boring and I wouldn't want to watch it. And then when 9/11 happened, I don't remember if I found out sooner, but my memory is of getting home from school and it just being everywhere on the TV and just being transfixed and watching it. And 9/11 had a really big impact on me. And I feel like sometimes that feels really strange to say, almost like I don't have the right for 9/11 to have had a big impact on me. The reason that I think it did was because, in my mind, I had American family. I'd been to the States, I'd been to the Twin Towers. I had family that lived in New York, not anyone that I was particularly close to, but I just knew that they lived there. And growing up, I had a massive fascination with the States and was obsessed with the States and wished I was American and wanted to live in America. So I think because I had such a connection to it, I felt really impacted by 9/11. I recorded on a VHS tape. That's what makes me feel old, VHS. But I recorded the news onto this VHS tape. And then anytime there was a program or documentary about 9/11, I recorded it onto this tape.
Right.
I even, like the sticker that you would have across it, I wrote that this was my 9/11 tape and I drew a picture of the towers on it. And it affected me so much that every year on the anniversary, I'd watch the whole tape.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd watch the whole tape of the news story, of all the documentaries that came out about it, and I'd just sit and watch it all every single year. When I look back, I think, gosh, it's crazy that it affected me that much, that I felt so connected and almost like I felt like I needed to honour what happened by watching it every single year. It just really got in my head. But that's the first experience of feeling like really deeply impacted by something in a way that then actually carried on for years and years after.
Yeah, I can really hear why you would, though. I can, just as you were talking about your love for America and wanting to be American, and I was thinking about what you'd said last time about watching kind of American shows. I feel like that makes sense that you would be impacted in that way, that kind of it would make it feel closer. And I don't know if I've shut it out because I remember the day, I remember finding out about it and being like, God, we found out about this late. Yeah, how have we not heard about this all day? But I also remember, so I said on the last episode about my friend that I met online, she didn't live in New York, but her boyfriend at the time did. So I remember being really worried, not just about being worried that he was caught up in it. I don't remember if I was or not, but I do remember being worried about the impact on him afterwards because he had brown skin.
Right, okay, yeah.
So I do remember that. But as I'm listening to you, I'm also thinking about I feel like I was impacted by it. And, there were some horrendous images that were pumped out through the news. I've also watched several documentaries about it. and been really fascinated by it.
And the images, I don't know about you, but they're seared in my mind. Like, as you said that, certain images were then coming up in my mind.
Yeah. But as you were talking about it, I felt like I became really aware of the extent of the desensitization of it, that this horrendous thing could have happened, and that I've watched these videos of it happening, and that actually I can talk about it with no emotional connection at all.
Yeah.
That almost seeing these horrendous things on the news has become normal.
Yeah, it does become normal, and there's not much emotion attached to me as I talk about it. I think if I really allowed myself to go there, I would. As a child, I would every time I would watch that video. But of course, there is a somewhat normalcy to watching something so much that you become desensitized to it. It was different when I went to the memorial. When I went to Manhattan maybe 5 years ago now. It was different when I was physically there. But that's just really the start, I feel. So 9/11 in the news is really the start, at least in my memory. It may be different for people who are older and have lived through other really awful things, but in my timeline of life, I feel like that's the start of then lots of similar, really difficult and disturbing and frightening news that ultimately was to come. And then that also becomes weirdly normal.
Yeah. Yeah. So where are you at now in terms of engaging with the news or not?
So I go through phases, but I engage with the news not very often, or at least nowhere near in the same way that I used to. Just to reflect back a bit, just because it's relevant for now, but as I got older, so late teens, early 20s, I would say, I was then really into the news, but largely by getting it through like social media platforms. At the time, Twitter was like the place to go to get news and discuss current events and stuff like that. So I was big on Twitter at that time. But also, I had this real, well, now that I think about it, it's going to be connected to justice and justice sensitivity. But I had this real strong sense of needing to know what was happening to people, and that I owed it to them to know about their suffering. And when news articles would happen, and there was probably a bit of morbid curiosity in me that we all have as humans, but I would intentionally research more and dig deeper to find out about specific details, what had happened. So if somebody was brutally murdered, for example, I would intentionally go to find out even more information about the murder. The murder. They're murdered by a cow.
Stop
So it was a murder. Oh, that really made me laugh. No, I can do this.
I can't.
I just got the giggles now.
In the most serious of episodes.
Literally, yeah. I'm just interrupting the podcast for a second, just for anyone that's watching the video podcast on YouTube. If it looks like I've been crying, I'm not crying about the sad news. I'm crying because me and Alice have just been caught up in hysterical laughter because when I went to say murdered, I said moodered. And then literally every time now I try to say the word murdered, I'm just hearing murdered. And we keep laughing so much and having to restart it that I look like I've been crying. And I just feel like I need to say that because it's just going to look very weird on the video podcast. And so now we're going from talking about something very serious, like someone being murdered, and laughing about murder. So there we go. And now I've said it and I've got it out there, I'm hoping I can continue. So when I've read a headline about somebody being murdered, I have felt compelled to need to know more about the situation. And so I would intentionally go digging more to find out the really specific details, which of course now just is like, why on earth were you doing that? What purpose did that serve other than just to basically traumatize you by proxy? I think it just came from like, I need to know what happened. And also, I owe it to this victim to know exactly what they went through. I just remember I would just feel that so strongly that their suffering needed to be heard. It needed to be acknowledged. People needed to know what happened. And so I would go looking for the details and almost, maybe this is why I have such a sensitive nervous system now, but I'd want to feel their suffering. I felt like I needed to feel that in order for their memory to be honoured. I just felt it really strongly. So I spent quite a lot of time not just reading the news, but also finding out quite graphic details about things related to the news. And so connecting that back to today, because I've not just absorbed the news, but I've gone really into details of the news, it's only in later years that I've realised now, well, firstly, how that just would impact anybody. But secondly, as a very sensitive and highly empathic person, that is, of course, definitely not good for me. And so I've gone from being super absorbed in the news and wanting to know everything about what's going on to really pulling away and now not engaging with it anywhere near to the same extent. And I've gone through phases where I've disengaged literally completely, where people are then saying things to me like, can't believe this has happened. And I'm like, what? And they're genuinely like, how can you not know about that? But there's been times where I've had to come away entirely to have a total break. And over time, I've got comfortable with that because before, for reasons we can go into, that didn't feel okay to do. Now I tend to dip in and out and try to stay aware of what's going on, but on more of a surface level and not go into things too deeply. And again, there are emotions that come up for me around that, but I've also learned that that's what I need to do to protect myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so difficult, isn't it? Kind of getting the balance right. And I just, just listening to you, I just feel like there's so much going on kind of behind the scenes when we're following the news. So I totally relate to the justice part, and it is that way for me as well. But like I said before, another part of it for me is about needing to be prepared, which I think is quite common as well. I've definitely heard other people talking about that. I suppose I was just thinking about what is it that motivates us to follow things so intensely. And yeah, I can really relate to that, wanting to know more and wanting to know the specific details. And sometimes I think like, oh, is this just nosiness? And I don't think it is. It feels like there's more to it than just nosiness, but I don't know if I can quite articulate what it is other than I've said before about kind of needing to orient myself in time and space, and it kind of feels like that. I wonder if some of it for me is like trying to get to the why, like why did this happen? And I think some parts of me think that if they can figure out the why, that maybe there's some way that we can stop these kinds of things from happening.
Whereas I've gone the other way. I've gone full cynical.
Right, right.
A lot of the times, particularly when we're talking politically and things on a global scale,
Yeah,
a lot of the times I feel like this is what people want to be happening rather than how can we find ways to stop this from happening.
yeah.
I think that my cynical perspective now is that no, the powers that be, like they want this to happen.
I agree with that. Yeah, I do agree with that. And it makes me really sad to agree with it. But I watched a couple of documentaries, like there's one called Hypernormalization, which is on iPlayer, which really kind of shows you, it sounds gross to say it, but like the benefits to some people for some of this awful stuff
Mm.
happening. And just knowing that there are awful things happening and there are some mega, mega, can't even get your head around it how rich they are people that could solve so many problems that choose not to. That
Mm.
I just can't really understand that. I'm definitely in a place where I don't watch anywhere near as much like I never have the news on the TV anymore, which I used to have a lot. And since Elon Musk has taken over Twitter, and really for me, that's just a kind of far right breeding ground. Now, I know there's not just far right people on there, but it just feels like a really unhealthy space. But I used to be on Twitter a lot, kind of through the pandemic. Because it was faster than the news channels, you'd get the information quicker and from, different sources. Um, so now I use Blue Sky instead, which is not as fast paced, but it's still not great. So I had the day off yesterday and I was kind of absorbed in something else. And at the end of the day, I was like, oh, I haven't checked Blue Sky. And as soon as I went off it, just got that full feeling of like things are awful and there's not an awful lot that I can do about it. And that's really not a good place for me to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And it does, it really does feel like a difficult balance between staying engaged and aware, because I do think that that is important. And it is privilege to turn away. There's stuff kind of going, so I have a transgender family member. So there's stuff going through, there's stuff on the news all the time at the moment, and there's stuff potentially becoming law that will fundamentally limit the way that family member can engage outside of the house. And so there are parts of me that feel like people need to be paying attention to this, and they need to be arguing against it, because trans people are such a tiny percentage of the population. They need more than just trans people to argue against this, because their voices on their own are not enough. So there is, there is that kind of recognition of, we do need to stay engaged and aware. But the other side of that is that if I'm too engaged and too aware, that it overwhelms me, and then I just freeze with it, or I become really depressed about it. And that doesn't actually help anybody anyway. I'm just, I'm not making a difference to anything. I'm just reading and reading and reading and despairing and despairing and despairing, and that's not helping anybody anyway. So there is a difficult balance, but there has to be a balance. And I know that there are prominent activists that I've seen that say about the importance of joy, even when things are awful, because it's the joy that sustains you to keep going. And so I see that in a similar way, in terms of having that space away from the awful stuff that's in the news, because we're not robots. We can't go all the time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It also really depends on who we are as people and how we engage with some of those things. Because, well, firstly, one of the things that helped me to disengage less was understanding research around modern life and the news, around our nervous system and brains ultimately not being designed to be able to cope with and process and understand and hold the constant bombardment of news and media that we have today. And that actually, that's not good or healthy for anyone. So even if we're trying to stay in the loop a bit, we're still staying in the loop for like the world news. It's still too much information for anyone, but especially if you're someone who recognizes themselves as sensitive and who gets more deeply affected. There are some people who can absorb terrible headline after terrible headline and they just go on with their day. And they just read it, go, oh, that's awful, and then they move on. But if you're somebody who reads a terrible headline and then you can't stop thinking about it, and then you can't stop picturing it, and then your brain is living it, and you're watching it play out in your mind almost like it's a film, that's going to have a huge impact. And there are times when I have not even read the article, I've just seen a headline, and it keeps intrusively invading my mind, sometimes for days. So I also had to learn to accept that for myself, I can't compare myself to somebody else and how they engage in the news and how we should be aware of certain things, or it's our job to know what's happening here, there, or everywhere. That I need to look after myself and recognize that the impact that it has on me isn't the same as somebody else. And therefore, I do need to be more protective. And again, research also shows the impact of the powerlessness that you feel when you're coming across all these awful things and you literally can't do anything about it. That you have no power, and that then leads to helplessness.
Yeah.
And helplessness is traumatizing.
Yeah.
So if we're experiencing that again and again and again, you're just thinking about, oh my gosh, what is that doing to our bodies? Like, what is that doing to our mind? I think you're right about balance, because there have been times where I've cut myself off completely. And it's been good for me and it's been what I've needed. But then when it's gone on a bit long, I also start to feel disconnected from people and the world as well. I think for me, it's been finding a way where I can still feel like I'm a part of the world and connected with what's going on in the world, but in a way that's really protective and looks after me, and potentially just knowing the headlines of what's going on without going into the specific details. And I know that that is also a privilege to be able to do that. It doesn't feel great and there's a sense of guilt, but also it's just coming to the recognition that, but I can't do anything about it.
Yeah. 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 And when you say about guilt there, I always think about guilt as the emotion of doing something wrong. And I don't think it's necessarily that you're doing anything wrong, but that the guilt, it makes sense to me that it would be there, because I'm seeing it as a signal back to your values. and how strongly, not just you, general, you people hold their values. But yeah, I think sometimes we can feel like because we feel guilty, that means that we should do something different, that we should turn the TV back on, that we should pay more attention to it, that we should be more engaged. So yeah, I think there's a delicate balance between your values and the need to be engaged and take action for any change to happen. There's also what you said about things being out of control. Like with lots of these things, we just have no control over what is happening. And there's also an important thing about capacity. And I think it is worth acknowledging that we're both therapists. And I was really thinking about how to word this as we came into this episode, because I don't want to say that my job is emotionally draining, because that doesn't quite feel right. And I think the term that best fits for me is emotionally intense. It doesn't drain me to sit and be with people, but it does use a lot of emotional energy. So I can't then go and watch the news afterwards, or the other way around, particularly. I can't watch the news and be really impacted by things and then go in and sit with clients,
Mm.
because half my mind will be on what's happening over there when I just want to be focused on the person in front of me. So I think if your job is emotionally intense as well, that's another factor to take into account.
Yeah, it's not just about the sort of person that you are and what you feel your capacity is in general, but also there may be other things going on in your life that are taking a chunk of that emotional capacity
Yeah.
already, so that you have less to give than somebody who's doesn't have a job that takes a big chunk of it, or isn't a carer, or has a sick child, or other things that might be going on that mean that that capacity is less as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when I think about the balance between my values and wanting to take action and the need to withdraw, and then the feelings of like, oh, this is very privileged to be able to do this, where I come back to about that, I think it is about capacity. I think that's the main kind of compass. Like, what are we aiming for here? What is it that I'm aiming for by being informed? And yeah, like just going back to what I said before, like it doesn't help anybody for us to be massively informed, but to do nothing about that. Some of the ways that it's been helpful for me to be informed is that then when I'm having conversations with other people that aren't as informed, I'm able to say, oh, actually, did you know about this piece of information, or have you thought about it from this way? But yeah, I think sometimes like having to admit to myself that spending hours scrolling, or deep diving into whatever the background is of the situation, or what the more details are, isn't actually helping anybody, and also it's hurting me. And that the point
Mm.
is to take action. The point is, if something bad is happening, what can we do? And so I think it's important to acknowledge that in lots of places we don't have the power to change what's happening. I can't do anything about Donald Trump, but at the moment what I'm thinking about is how can I be more informed about, for example, Christian nationalism, which is not Christians. It's not, I'm not anti-religion, but a specific section of people, but that they have a lot of money and that they're pushing a lot of policy. So the way that I'm thinking at the moment is if I can educate myself on that a bit, then I can start to spot it when it pops up in UK politics, which it already is. And then I can start to tell other people around me about that. So I have a bit of control in that way. I can't control the whole picture, but I can have a little bit of influence on some level. But it has to be within my capacity, which at the moment is low because I've not been very well. So I'm not doing that. So in the pandemic, when everything felt out of control, I wrote a blog, and it was based on a talk by Bessel van der Kolk, who did The Body Keeps the Score. He did this little webinar, and I just kind of condensed some of what he was saying about the 6 things to keep in mind when everything feels out of control. So I thought I'd just list them out because I think they are really helpful things to come back to. So one is about self-kindness, is that when we're really stressed or feeling vulnerable, we can easily fall back into being very self-critical or assuming the worst of ourselves. I think we can hear this when we're like, oh, yeah, I'm so privileged and I should be doing more. is actually just to notice that inner dialogue and see if you can shift it more to a kinder dialogue. The second one is breathing. And I know, it doesn't feel like it's going to make much difference. And I know that breathing exercises are often met with a lot of eye rolls, and they can be unhelpful for some people. But breathing or having some kind of stillness practice or some kind of soothing practice that helps your nervous system feel settled feels important. So, not on its own, but as part of a wider thing. The third part is routine. So, when everything feels like chaos, that it's really helpful to have that kind of opposite of having the routine. So you having a routine of what you do every day is not going to have a big impact on the wider world. But if it helps you to feel more settled, that's going to help you stay in a place where you've got more capacity. The fourth one is movement, which can counteract that feeling frozen with things. So finding some way to move that feels good for you. The fifth one is joy. So I spoke briefly about this before, is having those little moments of joy that can sustain you when everything else is feeling kind of awful. And the last one is about connection. And this doesn't need to be big. In fact, I think in the webinar they spoke about even just sending like an emoji to somebody. Nothing else, just a little like thinking of you, or I'm here. And just those 6 things. I like to come back to those 6 things when things are feeling really hard. Again, I've said before, I love a formula. I love a bit of structure. I love something to help me feel a bit more grounded. I can put the link to that in the show notes. That sounds very proper. I think I've still not got my head around being a podcast host yet.
We are proper.
And we are proper, yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. I do well, there's safety in having a thing to come back to, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't there, to be able to know that that's there. And I often find so many of the things that support and help us are often quite simple things. And when you bring them all together, that they can be really helpful.
Yeah, well, like I was saying with the breathing, it kind of feels when there's something dreadful happening on the news, or, day after day after day, this awful thing, this awful thing, this awful thing, to then be like, oh, well, I'll just do some breathing exercises. It feels easy to be like, oh, how's that going to help? But I think having those things to come back to that are consistent and familiar and safe can help keep our nervous systems in a space where we feel okay enough.
Yes, that is really helpful advice, because everyone's going to want to approach their engagement with the news and what's going on in the world differently. And I think it's important that even if guilt does come up for people, like there is no right or wrong, it's just choosing what it is that's going to work for you. Because feeling guilty and then making yourself watch something, that's not going to change anything except making you feel bad.
Yeah.
I think the hard part for me with talking about this is that, of course, when people are aware and collective voices come together, change has happened. It's not that we're totally powerless and we've just got to roll with whatever it is that's going on. Huge change has happened. But also, that huge change is usually taken like a seriously long period of time, and people's attitudes and things like that slowly shifting and moving away. And one person can't singularly change something huge in the world. It's people ultimately coming together under a cause, and over consistent time of talking about it, then we start to get somewhere. But there are so many things where there's been really great movement on, and yet there's still so much more work to do, that, again, sitting and watching the news and feeling like you need to know about it all, that's not the part that's going to enact change anyway. So if you need to pull away from it, it's about knowing that that's okay. But also, if action and using your voice and being a part of something is also important, you can do that in so many different ways. That's not about being totally engaged with the news. So if there is one specific cause that's really important to you, or you can join the newsletters of the organizations that are doing something about that, and you can find out ways to get involved. And that could be something as big as volunteering, and it could just be signing petitions, using your voice through those organizations, and doing so in a way that works for you. It all comes down to capacity, because there are also causes that I really care about and I can't engage with them because of the impact that they have on me. So animal welfare, animal rights is a huge one for me. I would love to be able to be seriously involved in that. I would love to go out on marches and protests, but to do that means having awareness of what goes on and happens to animals, and I literally cannot take knowing it. They're the kind of headlines that stay with me for days when I read about that's happened to animals. And there are times where there might be stuff that's so incredibly important to you, and to be engaged in it actively harms you. And in those cases, it's about saying, that's okay. What I've tried to do is, rather than beat myself up that I can't do that, is just be so glad that there are people out there that can, and just be like so thankful that they're able to keep being in those spaces and putting those messages out.
Yeah.
I just give all my gratitude. Like, thank you so much that you can do that. And I'll try and use my voice somewhere where I don't get as affected, and put that somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that kind of made me think about, I was listening to something the other week where someone was talking about, I can't remember now, I think it was Just Stop Oil, it might have been Palestine Action, where somebody was talking about why is it older people, like why is it that we're seeing like elderly people getting arrested for being part of these protests? And they said it's because they can, because they haven't got a career to lose. They've done their career. It doesn't matter if their reputation is ruined or anything like that, that they're in a different space. And that really kind of opened my eyes to like, oh right, okay, different people have the ability or willingness to do this. If I was going to be arrested for something, I can't afford that. I have bills to pay. I've got children to feed. I literally cannot. So yeah, like you say, maybe there are other people with different ability or capacity to be able to do that. But it also, when you were talking there, it also popped into my head something that I came across on TikTok a while ago, which was about different ways to be a helper when it comes to social change. I looked it up last night to remind myself of what was in it. So it's called the Social Change Ecosystem Map, if anybody wants to look it up, which was done by somebody called Deepa Iyer. But they had 10 different roles, and I loved it because I just never thought about all the different ways that people can help. That's not just the narrow way that my brain was thinking about it. So they talked about weavers, which are the people that help other people to kind of be more connected, that there are experimenters, which includes researchers and people that ask lots of questions. There's frontline responders. There are visionaries who can create visions of what change could look like. There are builders, caregivers, disruptors, healers, storytellers, and guides. And yeah, that there's all these different ways that people can help. That doesn't have to be the getting lost in overwhelming news stories. And that makes me think about what we do in our role. That, yeah, I can't change any of these massive causes on my own, but I can help people feel better about themselves. And when people feel better about themselves, they're often more able to go out in the world and do better things.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's helping them be more engaged in something that, while it's not specific, is having a positive impact on society.
Definitely. I think increasing just self-awareness and compassion globally would have a huge impact on the things that we see in the world. And so again, I think change can also just come from the different things that we value. And if people would just turn inward more, that in itself could make and create so much change, because I can't tell you how many years I have spent thinking that I can change people's minds and get them to see things the way that I see things.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of the time, it's not the case, because a friend actually said this to me and I was like, oh yeah, that's mind blowing. I was talking about someone in my life whose views could not be more polar opposite than mine, and how much of a struggle that is for me. And that I would just wish they could see it from my perspective. And so as much as I might moan about people who aren't opening to changing their mind and stay stuck in their views, I would describe myself as someone that is open to having my mind challenged. But I also recognized, if I was in this scenario with this specific person whose views are totally polar opposite, actually, I would be going into that conversation wanting to get them to change their mind, but not being open to my mind being changed, because there's no way my mind could be changed on that anyway.
Yeah.
And so there are scenarios where I am open-minded and I am willing to have my views challenged and accept that I could be incorrect, or that I could consider a different perspective. But there are also ones where I am so convicted in what I believe that no, I'm not willing to budge on that. So if someone else is very convicted in what they believe and it's the opposite of mine, no conversation is going to get them to change their mind, just as they're not going to get me to change my mind on their perspective. So when two people are totally polar opposite, it's a moot point. It's a waste of energy. Nobody's going to budge. I don't really spend much time now trying to change people's minds or get them to see things from my perspective, unless we are two people approaching a conversation where we're just sharing our thoughts and ideas in a way that feels balanced and interesting and respectful. Then I really enjoy those conversations. But most political conversations ultimately are just a way to get to exhaustion very, very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I know earlier I said that I feel like I'm in quite a cynical place. Sometimes I argue that maybe I'm just in a realistic place, but maybe there is a bit of cynicism in there. But I've been so convicted for so many years that if I just do this, I could create change, or really having like these dreams of how the world can be and what it could look like, and almost falling under this illusion that surely everybody wants that and wants that to look like that. Where at one point, I was really adamant that I was going to become an MP, and if I could become an MP, then it wasn't until I started talking to people in a party about how I could get there that I was essentially told it's a personality contest. People don't put you forward because of your policies, they put you forward because of your personality, essentially. And I was like, well, as an introverted person, that's probably not going to happen. But I just thought people would vote for you because they like your policies. So I've gone down so many roads of thinking I could create all of this change in the world that ultimately I've come back to actually I can't, because the world's not really set up for that. But I can maybe make smaller differences and get involved on a more local or grassroots level that can still be meaningful and important. And that doesn't mean I have to be aware of everything that's going on and all the horrors of the world to do that.
I think hope is really important to me. Like I think just in the last year or so, I've really come to realize that there are lots of people out there that operate on a dog eat dog basis, that maybe even just were quicker at recognizing that the world does work in that way, and that you have to look after number one first to some degree, which feels sad for me, and I don't like that. But there is some solidity to it. But for me, having hope that things can change is non-negotiable. That if I've gone to a place where I feel hopeless, for me, that's a warning sign that I need to kind of look again at what's going on or what's going on in me. Yeah, I just think it's so important to feel to have hope in some way, not an airy fairy, oh, things will be fine, but a gritty hope of this is gonna, maybe this will take blood, sweat, and tears, but we have to move this forward in some way. I think one of the things that I find so distressing at the moment is that it feels like we're going backwards in lots of areas.
Yeah.
And that feels so disheartening and frightening. But yeah, and I think it's important that we work together. Those of us that want things to be different continue to work together. Years and years ago, I read something that said that the first phase of propaganda is to exhaust you. So I've always held that in my mind, is I will be exhausted by this, but that's why I take the breaks. That's why I pull away from it, is so that I don't end up terminally exhausted, if you like, so that I can keep going in some way.
Yeah. And it's also about maybe where you can find that hope. What I have personally found helpful is, I'm just going to put this honestly. So I feel like I've lost faith in humanity as a whole. The reason I say that is because I think I'm just really now tuned into the sense of the clambering for power and the greed and the constant need for more and the hoarding of wealth and all of those things. And so when I think about humanity as a whole and how we can be in the constant repeating of history that we don't seem to learn from, like as a whole, I don't have actually much hope there. But where then I have got hope is in individual people. So when I think about individual humans, I really believe in their capacity for good, for compassion, empathy, for selflessness, for helping other people. One of the things that I've always liked when people talk about like terrorist attacks and things like that is, oh, but look for the people that are helping, look for the ones that are putting their lives at risk, for those that just run in and help total strangers. I personally take comfort and hope in the power of the individual person. And it's a shame that I don't quite see that manifest globally. But that to me means that I can still hold on to goodness, and I can still hold on to hope that individual humans can be incredible and amazing. I don't feel the hopelessness of when I think of humanity as a whole doesn't suffocate me and doesn't sink me into despair, because I just turn my attention to the amazing things that individual humans can do for one another.
Yeah. I think that's really important. And, I'm mindful about time and that we need to be bringing this to a close. But what I've been thinking about a bit as you're talking is this is a really heavy subject for us to be talking about. And just wanting to remind people that are listening that they might need to take a bit of time after this to reconnect with things that help them to feel okay again, because we have touched on despair, essentially, the despair that we each feel, the despair that's kind of projected out in the world. That, it'll be really important for people to take good care as they come out of this episode and go into the rest of their day.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Another thing that's just made me think about in terms of how to go forwards from this episode, we spoke about that it is okay to disengage completely. It is okay to take breaks. It's okay to change the way you want to engage with the news. And also, just to add, another thing that's really helped me is remembering there's lots of different types of news. So I subscribe to news outlets where I keep up to date with scientific news, what's been discovered in science. I get news about health research and strides forwards in health. I get news about what's latest discoveries in psychology and things like that. So there's so many different sources and places where you can get news that's not just what's happening in the world politically on a global scale, who's harmed who. You can also get news about what they're finding at the edge of the universe and things like that. Think about other sources of news, what interests you, and treat that as your news, because some of that is like really nice and interesting and exciting news. So curate your social media feeds or your email inbox to the type of news that you want to get, and then you're still staying engaged with what's going on in the world and what's progressing in the world in a way that just feels nicer.
And share it with us on our social media channels as well. Like, what cool stuff are you learning about instead of just being bombarded by the news as it is pumped to you on the news channels?
Yeah, definitely. So as Alice said, we've spoken about quite a lot of difficult subjects, sometimes filled with despair and a bit of hopelessness. And so we're aware of what you might be holding as this podcast comes to a close. So please do take care of yourself. And remember that if the news is leaving you feeling overwhelmed or guilty, you're not selfish, you're certainly not broken, you're human, and your nervous system has limits.
Caring doesn't mean drowning yourself in pain. It means finding a way to stay connected that doesn't burn you out.
So maybe this week, just notice, what's my capacity? What helps me stay engaged without spiraling?
Next time, we're diving into too boring to be fun, that creeping fear that because you'd rather stay at home with a book or a board game than go clubbing, you must be dull.
We'll talk about how society equates fun with loudness, drinking, and being out there, and what happens when you don't fit that mould.
And more importantly, how to reclaim your own definition of fun, even if somebody else calls it boring.
For now, sit with this question: what is a sustainable way that you can engage with the news in order to be able to care for yourself? And what might that look like?
That's all from us today. If this episode made you feel a bit less alone, the best way to help us reach more people is to subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Those simple clicks help other sensitive humans find us when they need it most. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.